At a family birthday dinner, my dad called me a dropout in front of everyone and laughed while the room stayed silent. They thought I was the failure who walked away from college and ruined my future. I kept quiet for years. That night, one simple question revealed the truth. I wasn't just doing fine. I was the CEO of the company my brother-in-law worked for. The silence that followed changed our family forever. I wasn't even out of my jacket when my dad said it. The words cut through the general hubbub of the family gathering, a familiar, sharp-edged tool he wielded with the precision of a surgeon and the cruelty of a stranger. Didn't know they let dropouts in here. A few relatives laughed. It was a brittle, nervous laughter, the kind that people use when they don't want to rock a boat they've been sailing on their whole lives. I just nodded, a motion that felt less like agreement and more like the bobbing of a cork on a rough sea, and took a seat at the back of my grandmother's living room. I'd been expecting it, in a way. You always expect the weather when you live in a storm. My dad, Richard, was a master of the opening salvo. It was his way of establishing dominance, of reminding me and everyone else of my designated place in the family hierarchy. I was the disappointment, the one who didn't finish college, the one who took a crazy path, the one who, in his eyes, had thrown away every opportunity he never had. I'd heard it all before. The words themselves had lost their sting over the years. It was the weight behind them, the years of accumulated disapproval that pressed down on my shoulders. My grandmother's house hadn't changed in 30 years. The same floral wallpaper, the same ticking clock on the mantelpiece, the same smell of potpourri and old wood. It was a museum of my childhood, a place where every corner held a ghost of a younger, more hopeful version of myself. The version that still thought he could make his dad proud. That version had died a long time ago, suffocated under the weight of expectations I could never meet. I kept my head down, scrolling through my phone, a pathetic shield against the reality of the room. I could feel their eyes on me, the curious glances, the pitying looks. My mom, bless her heart, tried to catch my eye, a silent apology in her gentle gaze. She was caught in the middle, loving both her husband and her son, a position that had to be its own kind of lonely hell. I gave her a small, reassuring smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. I was fine. I was always fine. I'd learned to build a fortress around myself, and tonight, I was going to need every brick. The gathering was for my Aunt Carol's birthday. Nothing major, just a family get-together. Pizza, soda, a store-bought cake. The usual. My sister, Jenna, was there with her husband, Mark, and their 2 kids, who were already running around causing chaos, a welcome distraction from the adult tension. My younger brother, Kyle, was holding court in the corner, talking loudly about his latest promotion at the marketing firm where he worked. He was the golden child, the one who'd done everything right. College, good job, nice apartment, a girlfriend who was a dental hygienist. He was the walking, talking embodiment of my dad's definition of success. I listened to Kyle talk about quarterly reports and brand synergy, a language I understood but had no desire to speak. My world was different. It was a world of code, of algorithms, of user experience and market disruption. It was a world my family knew nothing about, and, more importantly, a world they had no interest in knowing. To them, if you weren't a doctor, a lawyer, or working a safe, respectable 9-to-5, you were basically a drifter. My dad was in the kitchen, his voice a low rumble punctuated by my uncle's gruff laughter. They were probably talking about sports, or politics, or any of the other safe topics that men use to avoid having real conversations. I wondered what they'd say if they knew what my life actually looked like. Probably wouldn't believe it. Probably think I was lying. It was easier to keep the truth in my pocket, a warm, secret weight that was mine and mine alone. Jenna came over and sat on the arm of the sofa next to me. "Hey you," she said softly. Of all my family, Jenna was the one I was closest to. She was 5 years older and had always been a kind of protector, a buffer between me and my dad's sharper edges. But even she didn't know the full story. I'd kept her at a distance too, not wanting to put her in an even more impossible position. "Hey, Jen," I replied, shoving my phone back into my pocket. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes searching my face. "Peachy," I said, the word dripping with a sarcasm I couldn't quite hide. She squeezed my arm. "Ignore him. You know how he is." "Yeah," I said. "I know. That was the problem. I knew exactly how he was. I'd spent my whole life knowing." Dinner was announced, and we all shuffled into the dining room, a slightly chaotic migration of people and paper plates. I ended up at the far end of the table, as far from my dad as possible. It was an unspoken seating arrangement that had developed over the years. My mom sat next to him, a human shield. Kyle was on his other side, the favored son basking in the reflected glory of their conversation. The meal was a symphony of forced pleasantries. How was the drive? Did you see the game last night? Isn't the weather just crazy? I answered when spoken to, kept my eyes on my plate, and counted the minutes until I could reasonably make my escape. I'd promised my mom I'd come, and I had. My duty was done. Then, Mark sat down in the empty chair next to me. Mark was okay. He was a bit of a try-hard, always eager to be part of the family, which meant he sometimes leaned into my dad's way of thinking. But he wasn't malicious, just desperate for approval. He worked in sales for a mid-sized logistics company. He was a good guy, if a bit oblivious. So, he said, unfolding his paper napkin with a flourish. How are things, man? Long time no see. Things are good, Mark. Busy? I said, my standard reply. Yeah? Doing what? He asked, taking a bite of his pizza. It was an innocent question, the kind you ask to make conversation. But I felt the weight of the table shift slightly, as if everyone's attention had just tilted a few degrees in our direction. I'd been dreading this. The what do you do question. It was the gateway to the usual interrogation. I could have lied, made up something generic. But I was tired. Tired of the hiding, tired of the shame they projected onto me, tired of carrying a secret that felt less like a shield and more like a lie. I work for a tech company, I said, keeping my voice level. Oh, cool. Doing what? IT support? My company outsources all that to India, he said with a chuckle. No, I said, a small, tight smile on my lips. I'm in management. Management, huh? That's great, he said, genuinely pleased for me. Which company? Maybe we can do business together sometime. I paused. This was the moment. The point of no return. I could see my dad at the other end of the table, leaning over to say something to my uncle, a smirk on his face. He hadn't heard the conversation, but he was probably enjoying the fact that Mark, the new guy, was stuck talking to the family failure. I said the name. It wasn't a flashy name, not a household word like Google or Amazon. But in the world of business-to-business software, it was a giant. A quiet, dominant force that powered thousands of other companies. It was a name that commanded respect in boardrooms and at industry conferences. I said it quietly, just to Mark. His reaction was immediate. He paused, a slice of pizza halfway to his mouth. He looked me over again, his brow furrowed in confusion. It was as if he was trying to reconcile the guy in the worn jeans and the plain jacket with the name I'd just uttered. He blinked, his mouth opening and closing slightly. Then, the penny dropped. His eyes went wide. The color drained from his face, then rushed back in a crimson tide. He put the pizza down, his hand trembling slightly. The silence that erupted from him was so profound, so complete, that it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of awe, shock, and dawning horror. He stammered, his voice a choked whisper that, in the sudden quiet, carried to every corner of the room. Wait, he breathed, his eyes fixed on mine. You're my CEO? The room went dead silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. Each tick a small hammer blow against the fragile reality the room had just inhabited. For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. It was as if someone had hit pause on the world. I could see the confusion on their faces. They were trying to process the words. My CEO? What did that mean? How could the dropout, the disappointment, be anyone's CEO, let alone the CEO of the company that Mark, the eager-to-please son-in-law, worked for? Mark was still staring at me, his face a perfect canvas of disbelief. He worked for Apex Solutions. I knew that. I'd seen his LinkedIn profile when the company had been going through the onboarding process after we acquired his firm last year. Apex had been a small logistics company we'd bought to integrate their delivery network into our platform. Mark was a mid-level sales manager there. He'd kept his job, part of the acquisition deal. He was, technically, my employee. He had been for the last 8 months. Leo, my mom's voice broke the silence, soft and hesitant. Is that true? I didn't answer. I just looked at my dad. His face was a storm. I saw disbelief first, a stubborn refusal to accept what he'd just heard. Then, a flicker of something else, something I'd never seen on his face before. Uncertainty. It was quickly masked by a wave of anger, his default setting. His jaw tightened, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. "That's ridiculous," he scoffed, his voice loud in the quiet room. "Mark, you've got it wrong. He's messing with you." Mark shook his head slowly, still staring at me as if I were a ghost. "No," he whispered. "No, I don't think he is. We got an email last year. About the acquisition. It had his picture. A professional picture, but it's him. It's definitely him. Leo Martin. Our CEO. The name. My full name. Leo Martin." It sounded so official, so foreign, in this room full of childhood memories and old resentments. I'd built a company, a multi-million-dollar company, and I'd used my full name. A part of me, I think, had wanted them to find out. Not like this. Not with a dramatic reveal. But some part of me had wanted them to Google me one day, to see the articles, to finally understand. But they never had. They'd never been curious enough to look. Ka was staring at me, his mouth slightly agape. His girlfriend was whispering something in his ear, her eyes wide. Jenna had a hand over her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. My aunts and uncles were exchanging glances, a low murmur of shocked whispers beginning to fill the vacuum left by the silence. My dad, though? My dad was a statue of frozen rage. I could see the war happening behind his eyes. The need to maintain control, to be the patriarch, the one who was always right, was clashing violently with the undeniable reality sitting at the far end of his table. His whole world, the narrative he'd constructed about me, the story of the failure he'd told himself and anyone who would listen for the last 7 years, was crumbling around him. "Mark," my dad said, his voice strained, trying a different tactic. "Are you sure? Maybe it's a different company. A different Leo Martin." Mark shook his head again, more emphatically this time. "No, Mr. Harrison. Apex Solutions. We were bought out last year. I've been working for Leo's company for 8 months. I never put it together. The last name, I guess. And Leo? I mean, Mr. Martin. He keeps a low profile. There aren't a lot of public photos." That was true. I deliberately stayed out of the spotlight. I let my work speak for itself. I hated the pomp and circumstance of the corporate world. I preferred jeans and a quiet office to suits and boardrooms. It was one of the reasons I'd been able to keep my secret for so long. I was just another face in the tech world, until you looked at the bylines on the business journals. I finally spoke, my voice calm, cutting through the whispers. "It's true." I looked directly at my dad. "I founded Apex Solutions 6 years ago, after I dropped out. We went public 2 years ago. Last year, we acquired, among other companies, the one Mark works for." The words hung in the air, simple, declarative, and utterly devastating to the carefully constructed reality of the room. I wasn't just successful. I was wildly, incomprehensibly successful. I had done what no one in my family, including my father, had ever done. I had built an empire from nothing. The whispers stopped. The room went silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of a tomb. The silence of something dying. And that something was my father's pride. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. His face was pale, then red. His hands were shaking. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see anger in his eyes. I saw something else, something raw and ugly. I saw fear. And I saw shame. A deep, gut-wrenching shame that he was trying, and failing, to hide. "You think you're something special?" He spat, his voice cracking. "You think just because you got lucky, just because you fell into some money, that makes you better than us?" I stayed seated. I stayed calm. This was the moment I'd rehearsed in my head 1,000 times. The moment of confrontation. But now that it was here, I felt no satisfaction, no triumph. Just a deep, profound sadness. "I never said I was better than anyone, Dad," I said quietly. "You did. You've been telling me I was worthless for 7 years. You told everyone here, anyone who would listen, that I was a dropout, a failure, a waste of space. I never argued. I just let you believe what you wanted to believe. You disrespected this family," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You dropped out of college, you broke your mother's heart. And you walked away. I walked away from your version of success." I corrected him, my voice still calm. "I walked away from a path that was making me miserable, just so I could try to find my own. And I found it. I found it without your help, Without your belief, without your love. I did it alone. My mom was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Jenna had moved to stand behind me, a silent show of support. Kyle just looked lost, his whole understanding of our family dynamic shattered. "You're a liar," my dad whispered, but the word had no power anymore. It was a last, desperate gasp of a dying man. "You've been lying to us this whole time." "I've been silent," I said. "There's a difference. I never lied. You just never asked. You never wanted to know who I really was. You were too busy telling me." I stood up then, slowly. I took my jacket off the back of the chair and put it on. I looked around the room at the faces of my family. My aunts and uncles, who had always gone along with my dad's narrative. My cousins, who probably felt awkward and confused. My brother, the golden child, who suddenly looked like he was made of glass. "I didn't come here to start a fight," I said, my voice filling the room. "I came here because Grandma asked me to, and because I love my mom. I didn't come here to brag, or to rub anything in anyone's face." Mark asked a simple question, and I gave him a simple answer. I looked back at my dad. He was still standing, but he looked deflated, a balloon with all the air let out. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollow, vacant look. "I'm not going to apologize for my success," I said to him. "Just like I never asked you to apologize for all the years of telling me I was a failure. I don't need your approval, Dad. I haven't needed it for a very long time. I built a life for myself, a good life, on the foundation of all the things you said I couldn't do. And I'm proud of that." I turned to Mark, who was still sitting there, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Mark, it was good to finally meet you in person, outside of a quarterly review. Don't worry about Monday. Your job is safe. You're a good salesman." I gave a small nod to my mom, a silent promise that I would call her tomorrow, and then I walked out of the dining room, through the living room with its floral wallpaper and ticking clock, and out the front door into the cool night air. The door closed behind me with a soft click, cutting off the initial eruption of noise that followed my exit. I stood on the porch for a moment, taking deep breaths. The air smelled like cut grass and the faint hint of jasmine from my grandmother's garden. It was peaceful. It was quiet. It was everything the house behind me was not. I got in my car, an unassuming sedan that I drove specifically because it was unassuming, and I sat there for a long time. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. The release of 7 years of silence. The weight I'd been carrying, the secret I'd been guarding, was gone. And in its place was a strange, hollow emptiness. I thought about my dad's face. The shame. The fear. The utter collapse of his world. I had fantasized about this moment for years. I'd imagined the satisfaction of proving him wrong, of watching him eat his words. But now that it had happened, it just felt sad. It felt like the final, irrevocable breaking of something that had been broken for a very long time. There was no winner here. There was just a family, shattered on the floor of my grandmother's dining room, because a father couldn't love his son for who he was, only for who he wanted him to be. I drove home in a daze. The city lights blurred past the window. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket. Text from Jenna. "Leo, call me. Please." Text from my mom. "Honey, are you okay? I love you." A text from Kyle. "Dude, WTF?" I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to talk. I needed to process. My apartment was on the top floor of a modern building downtown. It was spacious, minimalist, and utterly impersonal. It was where I slept, but it wasn't a home. I'd never let it become one. Maybe because I'd never really felt like I deserved a home. Maybe because the idea of home was so tangled up with that house, that dining room, that man, that I couldn't separate the two. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on my balcony, looking out at the city. The silence was profound. Not the heavy, judgmental silence of my family's living room, but a peaceful, empty silence. I let my mind wander. I thought about the journey, the dropping out, my dad's face when I told him, the disgust, the disappointment, the way he'd turned his back on me, literally, and walked away. I thought about the early days of the company, sleeping on a friend's couch, living on ramen noodles, working 18-hour days. I thought about the first investor who believed in me, the first employee I hired, the first time we turned a profit. I thought about the IPO, the sudden, surreal wealth, the feeling of looking at a bank account with more zeros than I'd ever imagined, and feeling nothing. Because the one person I'd wanted to show it to the one person whose approval I'd secretly craved my whole life, would have just seen it as confirmation of his own failures. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. From Jenna. I hesitated, then answered. "Hey," I said, my voice flat. "Oh my God, Leo," she breathed. "Are you okay? That was insane." "I'm fine, Jen. I'm home." "Home? Your apartment?" "I'm coming over." "Jen, no, it's late." "I'm fine, really." "No, you're not. I'm your sister. I'm coming over. Text me your address." She hung up before I could argue. I texted her the address and went back to staring at the city. 30 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Jenna, her eyes red-rimmed, holding a grocery bag. "I brought ice cream," she said, holding it up like a peace offering. I managed a small smile. "Come in." She walked in, her eyes wide as she took in the apartment. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the modern furniture, the city view. "Leo," she whispered. This is insane. You live here." "I own it," I said, leading her to the kitchen. She put the ice cream on the counter and just stared at me. "Who are you?" she asked, but it wasn't an accusation. It was genuine wonder. "I'm still your brother, Jen. That hasn't changed." "But a CEO? Of a massive company? How? When? Why didn't you tell me?" I got 2 spoons out of a drawer and opened the ice cream. "It's a long story. We have all night," she said. So I told her. I told her everything. About the early days, the struggles, the near bankruptcies, the investors who pulled out, the employees who believed in me. I told her about the IPO, the sudden wealth, the surreal feeling of it all. I told her about why I'd kept it a secret. Not to be mysterious, but because I was ashamed. Not of my success, but of my family's failure to see me. I was ashamed that I still cared what they thought. I was ashamed that a part of me was still that 19-year-old kid, desperate for his dad's approval. Jenna listened without interrupting. When I was finally done, she was crying again. "I'm so sorry, Leo," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you more. It's not your fault, Jen. You were caught in the middle. You had your own life. I should have tried harder. I should have visited you more, asked more questions. I believed Dad. We all did. He was so convincing. He made it sound like you'd just given up, like you were wasting your life." "I know," I said. That's what he needed to believe. It made him feel better about his own choices. We sat in silence for a while, eating ice cream and watching the city lights twinkle below us. "What are you going to do now?" Jenna asked. "About what?" "About Dad. About the family. Mom is a mess. She doesn't know what to think. Kyle is freaking out. He keeps texting me, asking if you're going to fire him from being a brother or something." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I'm not going to fire anyone. I don't want anything from them. I never did. I just wanted them to stop treating me like I was invisible. Or worse, like I was a problem to be solved." "They won't see it that way," Jenna said softly. "You know that, right? Dad especially. He's not going to be able to handle this. His whole identity is wrapped up in being the successful one, the patriarch, the one who's always right. Finding out that you, the one he wrote off, are more successful than he ever dreamed of being. It's going to destroy him." I nodded. I knew she was right. There would be no reconciliation, no tearful apology, no hallmark moment where my dad finally saw the error of his ways and embraced me. That only happened in movies. In real life, pride was a poison that killed everything it touched. "I don't want to destroy him, Jen. I just want to be left alone." "That's not going to happen either," she said. "The cat is out of the bag. By tomorrow, the whole family will know. By next week, who knows? Maybe the whole town. You're a celebrity now, Leo, whether you like it or not." She was right about that. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, texts, and uninvited visitors. My mom called, crying, wanting to understand. I talked to her, patiently explaining my journey, reassuring her that I loved her, that none of this changed how I felt about her. She was caught in the middle, and I didn't want to make it harder for her. Kyle showed up at my apartment, looking shell-shocked. He stammered through an apology of sorts, mostly about how he'd never meant to make me feel bad, how he'd just been trying to make Dad proud. I believed him. Kyle wasn't a bad guy. He was just a product of his environment. I told him it was fine, that we were still brothers, that I didn't hold any of it against him personally. He left looking relieved, but also a little lost, as if the ground beneath his feet had shifted and he wasn't sure where to stand. My aunts and uncles called, their voices dripping with a sudden, syrupy respect that made my skin crawl. They wanted to catch up, to hear all about my amazing success. I was polite but distant. I knew these were the same people who'd laughed at my dad's jokes about me for years. I wasn't about to let them rewrite history now. And then there was my dad. He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't show up. For a week, there was radio silence from him. I heard through Jenna that he'd barely left the house, that he was moody and withdrawn, that he'd snapped at my mom a few times. The great Richard Harrison, the man who always had an opinion, the man who was always right, had nothing to say. Part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction. Good. Let him stew. Let him sit with the knowledge that the son he'd spent 7 years belittling was worth more than he would ever be. But the satisfaction was short-lived, replaced by that same hollow sadness. This wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy. 2 weeks after the gathering, I got an email. It was from my dad. The subject line was simply Leo. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. My heart was pounding. What could he possibly have to say? The email was short. It read, "Leo, we need to talk. Not about business. About us. Come to the house on Saturday. 2 p.m. alone." Dad. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just a command, dressed up as an invitation. The old man, trying to assert control even now. A part of me wanted to delete it, to ignore it, to maintain the peaceful silence I'd found. But another part of me, the part that still remembered being that little boy who just wanted his dad to be proud, knew I had to go. I had to hear what he had to say. I had to close this chapter, one way or another. I didn't reply to the email. But on Saturday, at 1:45 p.m., I found myself parking my unassuming sedan in front of my parents' house. It looked the same. The same perfectly manicured lawn, the same white picket fence, the same swing on the front porch where I'd sat with my mom as a kid. It was a picture of suburban normalcy, a facade that hid the rot within. I sat in the car for a few minutes, gathering my thoughts. Then I got out, walked up the path, and knocked on the door. It wasn't my childhood home anymore. It was just a house. My mom answered. She looked tired, but she smiled when she saw me, a genuine, warm smile. "Leo," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "Thank you for coming." "Hi, Mom," I said, hugging her back. "He's in the backyard," she said softly, her eyes searching my face. "Just be patient with him, okay? He's not good with feelings." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I had any patience left to give. I walked through the house, past the living room with its floral wallpaper, through the kitchen that smelled like lemon cleaner, and out the back door. My dad was sitting at the old wooden picnic table in the middle of the yard. He was alone, staring at the garden my mom had planted. He looked smaller. That was the only word for it. The bluster, the confidence, the arrogant tilt of his head, it was all gone. He looked like an old man, tired and defeated. He heard me approach and looked up. Our eyes met. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, thick with years of unspoken words and buried pain. "Sit down," he said finally, his voice gruff but not hostile. I sat across from him at the picnic table. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun. I could hear birds singing in a nearby tree. It was all so absurdly peaceful. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the garden. "Your mother's flowers are doing well this year," he said. It was such a mundane, pointless observation that it almost made me laugh. "Yeah," I said. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I sat there, frozen. All the anger, all the resentment, all the years of pain, they were all still there. But they were suddenly tangled up with a profound, overwhelming pity. Pity for this broken man who had spent his whole life so afraid of failure that he'd destroyed the one thing he should have protected, his relationship with his son. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said, his voice muffled by his hands. "I know I don't deserve it. I needed you to know that I know. I know what I did. I know I was wrong. And I'm so proud of you, Leo. I've always been proud of you. I was just too stupid and too scared to say it." He looked up at me, his face a mess of tears and anguish. "Can you ever forgive an old fool for being an idiot?" I looked at this man, my father. I saw the fear, the regret, the genuine, raw pain in his eyes. I thought about all the years I'd wished for this moment. All the years I'd fantasized about him finally seeing me, finally acknowledging me. And now it was here. It wasn't the triumphant, vindicating moment I'd imagined. It was messy and painful and sad. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just sat there, letting the silence stretch out between us. Then, Slowly, I reached across the table and put my hand on his. The touch seemed to break something in him. He let out a shuddering sob and grabbed my hand, holding it tightly. We sat like that for a long time, father and son, connected for the first time in years by a bridge of shared pain and a fragile, tentative hope. "It's going to take time, Dad," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "A lot of time. You hurt me. You hurt me for a very long time." "I know," he whispered. "I can't just forget that. I can't just pretend it didn't happen." "I know," he said again. "I don't expect you to. I want a chance to be different, a chance to be the father I should have been." I looked at him, at his tear-streaked face, his pleading eyes. This was the man who had shaped me, for better or worse. The man whose voice I still heard in my head whenever I doubted myself. And for the first time, I saw him not as an adversary, but as a fellow human being, flawed and broken and desperately trying to find his way. "Okay," I said quietly. "Okay." It wasn't a full forgiveness. It wasn't a clean slate. It was just a beginning. A small, fragile opening in a wall that had stood for years. It was a chance. And for now, that was enough. We sat in the garden for another hour, talking. Not about business or success, but about small things. About my mom's flowers. About the old dog we'd had when I was a kid. About nothing, really. Just two people, learning to talk to each other again. When I finally left, my mom hugged me tight, tears in her eyes. She didn't ask what had happened. She just held me and whispered, "Thank you." I knew she'd been praying for this for years. The drive home was different from the drive there. The weight on my shoulders wasn't gone, but it had shifted. It was no longer the crushing weight of resentment and pain. It was the weight of a new beginning, heavy with its own uncertainties, but also light with the faintest glimmer of hope. The weeks that followed were awkward. My dad and I started talking on the phone, brief, stilted conversations at first. He'd ask about my work, and I'd tell him, not in a bragging way, but just as information. He listened, really listened, for the first time. He asked questions, intelligent ones, about the business, the technology, the challenges. It was strange, having him be interested in my life. It was also surprisingly nice. He came to visit my apartment. He walked through the rooms, his eyes wide, and for once, he didn't have a sarcastic comment. He just nodded and said, "You've built something amazing, son." Those 5 words meant more to me than any contract or bonus ever had. We started having dinner, just the two of us, once a week. It was awkward at first, filled with long silences and careful topics. But slowly, we found a rhythm. We talked about sports, about movies, about his job, which he now admitted he found unfulfilling. He even asked my advice about some investments he was considering. The tables had turned, and for the first time, he was willing to sit at my side of it. It wasn't always easy. There were setbacks. Old habits died hard. Sometimes a sarcastic comment would slip out, and I'd see the flash of the old dad, the critical one. But he'd catch himself, apologize immediately, and the moment would pass. He was trying. That was the key. He was genuinely, actively trying to be different. The rest of the family took their cues from us. My mom was overjoyed, of course. Kyle relaxed, realizing I wasn't going to hold his past conformity against him. Even my aunts and uncles, while still a bit too syrupy for my taste, were at least genuine in their attempts to reconnect. The family dynamic had shifted. The center of gravity was no longer my dad's approval. It was something else, something healthier. It was respect. Mark, my brother-in-law, was the most awkward one of all. He was terrified of me for weeks. He'd avoid me at family gatherings, stammer when he had to speak to me. I finally pulled him aside and told him, firmly, that at family events, I was just Leo, his brother-in-law, not his CEO. He relaxed after that, and we actually developed a decent friendship. He's a good guy, just easily intimidated. A year after that fateful family gathering, we had another one. This time, it was for my dad's birthday. My mom insisted on having it at their house. I drove up, parked my unassuming sedan, and walked in. The house was full of people, the same floral wallpaper, the same ticking clock. But the atmosphere was completely different. My dad was in the kitchen, grilling burgers on the stove, laughing with my uncle. He saw me come in and gave me a genuine smile. "Leo, get in here and grab a plate. Your mother made that potato salad you like." I walked into the kitchen, and he clapped me on the shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it was everything. It was acceptance. It was love. It was the connection I'd been missing my whole life. Later, after dinner, We were all sitting in the living room. The kids were playing on the floor. The adults were talking and laughing. My dad was holding court, but it was different now. He wasn't the center of attention because he demanded it. He was the center of attention because he was surrounded by people who loved him. At one point, he caught my eye across the room. He gave me a small nod, a private acknowledgement. It was a moment just between us. A silent thank you. A silent I love you. I nodded back. And in that moment, I realized that the redemption wasn't just his. It was mine too. I had spent so many years defined by his disapproval, by the pain he'd caused me. I had let his opinion of me become my opinion of myself. But in forgiving him, in opening that door, I had also freed myself. I was no longer the disappointed son. I was just a man, with a past that had shaped me, and a future that was my own. The story doesn't end there, of course. Life goes on. There are still challenges, still moments of tension, still old wounds that throb occasionally. But the foundation is different now. It's built on honesty, however painful, and on a willingness to try. I learned that family isn't about blood. It's about choice. My dad chose to be different. I chose to give him a chance. And together, we're choosing, every day, to build something new from the rubble of the old. And that, I think, is the real story. Not the dramatic reveal at a family gathering. Not the shock of a hidden identity. But the quiet, difficult, beautiful work of healing. The long, slow walk back to each other. One awkward conversation, one tentative gesture, one shared meal at a time. The silence after the storm isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's just the sound of two people learning to speak a new language. The language of forgiveness. The language of love. The language of family. Thank you for watching to my story. If it resonated with you, if it made you feel something, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories, and share this in the comments or with someone you love. You never know who might need to hear it. Take care of yourselves, and remember, it's never too late to rewrite your own story.